All right, get ready, because today we're taking a deep dive into some cutting-edge research,
Okay.
a paper called LlamaRestTest, Effective REST API Testing with Small Language Models.
Sounds intense.
It does sound pretty technical, I know. But believe me, this is going to be really interesting,
Yeah,
especially if you're into how AI is changing the way we build software, all that.
absolutely. And what's really fascinating about this research is how they're using these smaller,
Yeah.
more specialized LLMs.
Mhm.
It's kind of like
Mhm.
a laser-focused chat GPT, you could
Yeah.
say, to make sure all the websites and apps are talking to each other smoothly behind the scenes.
So it's like having a tiny AI expert, like making sure that all the online interactions happen without any hiccups.
Right.
Kind of like I don't know, a digital traffic cop or something.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're talking about making sure that all that software that powers everything online,
Right.
from booking a flight to streaming music and all that,
Mm-hmm.
is super robust and reliable.
Mm.
And to understand how it all works, we really need to get a handle on REST APIs.
Okay.
You're using them every day, probably without realizing it.
I gotta admit, REST APIs sound a bit intimidating to me.
Sure.
Can you break it down for me and for our listener in a way that doesn't make my head explode?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So imagine you're ordering food on your phone.
Okay.
You tap in your order,
Right.
and magically it appears at your door.
Yeah.
That magic is a REST API at work.
Okay.
It's like the messenger that takes your order from the app and delivers it to the restaurant system
Mm-hmm.
and brings back that confirmation to your phone.
Right.
So they're essentially these unsung heroes of the web carrying information back and forth between different systems.
So REST APIs are like the waiters of the internet going between my app and the giant kitchen of the web.
Right.
That makes so much more sense.
Good, good.
But why is testing these things so tricky?
Okay, well, imagine that waiter trying to take your order in a super crowded, super noisy restaurant
Right.
where everyone is speaking different languages.
Okay.
That's kind of what it's like for traditional software testing tools.
Oh, wow.
APIs can have really complex rules
Yeah.
and dependencies,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes those tools just struggle to keep up.
So paper mentions this awesome API,
Yeah.
which is using data from OpenStreetMap.
Yeah.
What makes that such a nightmare to test?
That's a great example because it has all these very specific parameters,
Right.
almost like secret codes,
Okay.
that control how you access and use that data.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of existing testing tools just aren't built to handle that level of complexity.
So it's like you're trying to put together a puzzle, but you're missing half the pieces.
Exactly.
So that's where these super smart LLMs come in,
Yeah.
offering a whole new way to tackle these testing challenges.
Exactly. The researchers have developed this new approach called LlamaRestTest,
Mm-hmm.
and it uses these smaller, specialized LLMs,
Mhm.
not just to follow pre-programmed instructions,
Right.
but to actually learn from the API's responses as it goes.
So it's like having a detective on the case,
Yes,
gathering clues and adjusting their strategy as they go.
that's a great way to put it.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's really cool.
But the paper also mentions that LlamaRest is broken down into two main parts.
Right.
LlamaRest IPD and LlamaRest X.
Exactly.
Can you unpack those for us?
Absolutely. So let's start with LlamaRest IPD, which is kind of like a dependency detective.
Okay.
So imagine you're trying to make a Spotify playlist.
Okay.
You need a special playlist ID, right?
Right, yeah.
Well, LlamaRest IPD
Uh-huh.
is able to figure out the hidden rules that govern how those IDs are generated and used.
So it's like uncovering the secret handshake that different parts of the API
Yeah.
use to talk to each other.
Yeah, it's figuring out the language they're speaking.
That's pretty impressive.
And what's even more remarkable is that it's doing this better than the existing tools. Even the ones using massive commercially available models like REST-GPT.
Oh, okay.
It's like a David and Goliath situation where a smaller, more agile LLM
Mm-hmm.
is outperforming a giant.
That's incredible. So this means that developers can catch those potential issues much earlier.
Right. Right. And it leads to like more stable and reliable apps for all of us.
Exactly.
So tell us about the other part of LlamaRestTest, LlamaRestX.
Okay, so LlamaRest X,
What's its superpower?
it's all about generating realistic test data,
Mm-hmm.
which is super important for really putting an API through its paces.
Right.
It's not enough to just throw random gibberish at it.
Yeah.
You need data that mimics real-world usage.
Okay, yeah.
Think of it like creating this virtual obstacle course for the API to navigate.
So like setting up a simulation to see how it handles all those different situations
Exactly.
that I might encounter in the real world.
Yeah.
Okay.
And LlamaRestX is really good at generating data that's not only realistic, but also semantically valid.
Meaning it makes sense within the context of the API.
Right.
And again, it often outperforms the competition, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah, the paper highlights an example where LlamaRestX was actually able to generate Spotify playlist IDs
Right.
and found a hidden bug.
Exactly.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It sounds like these LLMs are becoming like essential tools for anyone building software these days.
Absolutely.
But what about the technical side of things? I see the paper mentions this word quantization,
Right.
which sounds a bit mysterious, you know? Can you shed some light on what that is?
Sure. Think of quantization like putting the LLM on a diet.
Okay.
We're essentially slimming down the model
Okay.
to make it more efficient without sacrificing too much performance.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like compressing a large file
Right.
so it takes up less space on your computer.
Okay.
But you can still open and view it without any problems.
So it's about making these powerful LLMs more practical to use, especially for like everyday developers who might not have access to a supercomputer.
Exactly. And here's where it gets even more interesting.
Okay.
These smaller quantized models often perform just as well,
Wow.
or even better than the full-size versions.
Hold on. So you're telling me that sometimes smaller is actually better
Yeah.
when it comes to these LLMs? That's pretty mind-blowing.
It really challenges that assumption that bigger is always better in the world of AI.
Right.
In some cases, these leaner, more specialized LLMs are the perfect tool for the job.
That's fascinating. It makes me wonder, like, if these smaller LLMs can already do so much,
Yeah.
what other possibilities are out there? What other challenges might they be able to tackle in the future?
It's really exciting to think about.
It is. But before we get too carried away thinking about the future,
Sure.
let's take a closer look at the results of this research.
Okay.
Like, did LlamaRestTest actually live up to the hype?
Yeah,
Did it find bugs, improve testing, all that?
absolutely. And the results are really impressive. LlamaRestTest consistently achieved much higher code coverage
Right.
than other cutting-edge tools.
Okay.
So think of it this way.
Yeah.
Imagine a doctor who's only checking your heart rate, but not your blood pressure.
Okay.
LlamaRestTest is like that doctor who does a much more thorough examination,
Right.
making sure that nothing is missed.
Uh-huh.
In some cases, it was able to test almost twice as much of the API's code
Wow.
as those other tools.
That's a significant difference. But, like, what does that actually mean in terms of, you know,
Right.
real-world results?
It means that it was able to find more bugs,
Okay.
especially in complex systems like Spotify,
Right.
where other tools were completely stumped.
Oh, wow.
We're talking about those critical errors that could bring a whole website or app crashing down.
Yeah, those are not good.
And remember that Spotify bug we talked about earlier that LlamaRestX found?
Uh-huh.
That's a perfect example of how this technology can make the apps we use every day more reliable and bug-free.
So this isn't just about making developers' lives easier. It's about improving the experience for everyone who uses software, which is all of us.
Exactly.
And to really understand how all the pieces of LlamaRestTest fit together, the researchers did something called an ablation study,
Right.
which, I gotta be honest, sounds a bit intimidating.
So they basically took LlamaRestTest apart, piece by piece, to see which components were the most crucial.
So it's like taking a cake apart
Yeah.
to figure out which ingredient gives it that delicious flavor.
Exactly.
All right, I like where this is going.
Yeah,
What did
that-
they discover?
So they found that all the parts played a role,
Okay.
but two stood out as the real MVPs.
Mm-hmm.
The server response analysis
Okay.
and the dependency modeling.
So, like, remember how we talked about LlamaRestTest being like a detective?
Yes.
Well, this is where those detective skills really shine.
Exactly.
It's not just about understanding the API's structure.
Right.
It's about observing how it actually behaves in the real world and adapting.
Yeah, you gotta be flexible.
This makes me think about those self-driving cars
Yeah.
that are constantly learning and adjusting to the road conditions.
Right.
They're not just following some pre-programmed set of rules.
Exactly.
They're actually learning from experience and getting better over time.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah. Is that a fair comparison?
I think so.
Huh.
It's all about creating systems that can learn and evolve
Okay.
rather than being stuck with, a static set of instructions.
And that brings us to the really exciting part of this research.
Yeah.
The potential for self-learning testing systems.
It's really cool.
Okay, now you're speaking my language.
Yeah.
Self-learning software.
Yeah,
That sounds like something straight out of a science fiction movie.
it might sound futuristic, but it's closer than you think.
Really?
Yeah, imagine software that's constantly testing itself, finding its own weaknesses,
Yeah.
and even fixing them automatically,
Wow.
all without any human intervention.
That's incredible.
That's the power of LLMs.
It's almost like having a built-in immune system for our digital world. Yeah.
Constantly, like, scanning for threats and eliminating them
Right.
before they cause any real damage.
Exactly.
And this leads us to a really thought-provoking question.
Okay.
If these smaller LLMs can already master something as complex as a REST API,
Yeah.
what other software challenges might they conquer in the future?
That's a big question.
What other parts of our digital world could they completely revolutionize?
Lots to think about there.
There is. But before we, get too philosophical, let's come back to something you mentioned earlier.
Okay.
This idea that these smaller LLMs might actually be more practical
Right.
for, everyday developers.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't they still need a lot of computing power to work?
Well, that's a great question, and it's actually one of the most exciting aspects of this research.
Okay.
Because these LLMs are smaller and more specialized.
Right.
They don't need the same massive computing resources as those giant general-purpose models.
So you're saying that even small development teams or even individual developers could use this technology without breaking the bank on, expensive hardware?
That's the idea. It has the potential to democratize access to these powerful AI tools,
Wow.
making it possible for anyone with a good idea to create amazing software.
That's really inspiring. It sounds like this research is opening up a whole new world of possibilities for software development.
Well,
But what does it all mean for the average person out there who might not be, a tech expert?
Well, LLMs aren't confined to research labs or science fiction movies anymore.
Okay.
They're becoming essential tools for building and maintaining
Mm-hmm.
that digital infrastructure that we all rely on every day.
So it's not just about those,
Right.
fancy chatbots or AI-generated art.
Yeah.
It's about making sure that the websites we shop on,
Yes.
apps we use for banking,
Yeah.
and all the other digital services that we depend on
Yeah.
are working properly.
It's about making our digital lives work.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
So this research shows that smaller,
More specialized LLMs can often outperform even those massive resource-intensive models
yeah,
when it comes to specific tasks like testing REST APIs, and they can do it more efficiently, which is crucial for practical applications.
absolutely. And what's really exciting is this is just the beginning.
Really?
Yeah, as researchers keep exploring the potential of LLMs.
Okay.
Who knows what incredible breakthroughs are just around the corner?
And speaking of discovery,
Yeah.
I think it's time we shift gears a little bit
Okay.
and take a closer look at some of the specific details from the research
Right.
that really showcase the power of this approach.
All right.
So, are you ready for a deep dive into the data?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right, let's do it. I'm all about those juicy details. What specific findings from the research really jumped out at you?
Well, remember how we talked about LlamaRestTest achieving significantly higher code coverage?
Uh-huh.
The research actually dives into the numbers, and it's really impressive. LlamaRestTest consistently outperformed other state-of-the-art tools,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes by a factor of 2 or even more.
That's a huge difference, but it's more than just a numbers game, right?
Right?
What does that higher code coverage actually translate to in terms of,
Yeah.
finding and fixing bugs?
Well, it means LlamaRestTest can dig much deeper and test a much larger portion of the API's code.
Okay.
Think of it like exploring a vast, uncharted territory.
Okay.
LlamaRestTest is like this intrepid explorer venturing into every nook and cranny,
Mm-hmm.
leaving no stone unturned.
All right.
And that thoroughness leads to finding those hidden bugs
Wow.
that other tools might miss.
You mentioned earlier that LlamaRestTest uncovered a bunch of errors in like the OSM API and Spotify that other
Sure.
tools completely missed. Can you tell us more about those specific discoveries?
Those cases were really interesting because they highlight how LlamaRestTest can handle complexity
Okay.
in a way that other tools just can't. The errors it found weren't like these simple surface level issues.
Right.
They were often buried deep within the code,
Okay.
hidden behind layers of intricate dependencies.
So it's like LlamaRestTest has X-ray vision or something,
Yeah.
allowing it to see through all that complexity and pinpoint the exact location of the problem.
Exactly.
So it's not just about finding any bugs, it's about finding those really tricky hidden ones
Right.
that could cause major headaches down the road.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like this technology has the potential to make software so much more reliable and secure.
Absolutely. And that's a huge win for everyone.
Yeah.
Think about all the times you've been frustrated by a buggy app or website.
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Right. Well, LlamaRestTest and other similar LLM-powered tools could help prevent those frustrating experiences
That'd be great.
and make our digital lives much smoother.
So this research isn't just some academic exercise.
Yeah.
It has real-world implications that could benefit all of us.
For sure.
And I think that's what makes this deep dive so exciting. We've gone from understanding the basics of REST APIs to exploring the cutting edge of AI-powered software testing.
Yeah.
And it's clear that this technology has the potential to revolutionize the way we build and interact with software.
Absolutely.
It's incredible to think that it all started with, a single research paper.
Yeah.
It's a real testament to the power of human curiosity and that drive to explore new frontiers.
Oh, yeah, I agree.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought.
Yeah.
We've seen how these smaller, specialized LLMs can outperform even the giants in certain tasks.
Yeah.
We've seen how they can learn and adapt, becoming more effective over time. And we've seen how they have the potential to make our digital world more reliable, more secure,
Right.
and ultimately more enjoyable.
Absolutely.
So the question is, what's next?
Yeah. What is next?
What other incredible breakthroughs are just waiting to be discovered as researchers, continue to push the boundaries of what's possible with LLMs?
Yeah, that's the beauty of it. The future is wide open.
Yeah.
Filled with possibilities.
Right.
And as we've seen today, sometimes the most groundbreaking discoveries come from those unexpected places, from those who are willing to, think differently and challenge the status quo.
So to all our listeners out there, stay curious, keep exploring, and never stop asking questions.
That's good advice.
Who knows? Maybe you'll be the one to make the next big breakthrough in the world of AI.
That'd be awesome.
That's all for this episode of The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time for another fascinating journey into the world of knowledge and discovery.
Looking forward to it.
All right, see you then.
Okay, bye. The results are really impressive. LlamaRestTest consistently achieved way higher code coverage than any of those other tools.
Okay.
You can think of it like this. Imagine a doctor only checking your heart rate, but not your blood pressure.
Okay.
LlamaRestTest is like that doctor who does a way more thorough exam,
Okay.
making sure nothing is missed. In some cases, it could test almost twice as much of the API's code as the other tools.
Wow, that's a big difference.
Yeah.
But what does that actually mean, like in the real world?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it means LlamaRestTest was able to find more bugs,
Right.
especially in complicated systems like Spotify, where other tools were totally clueless. We're talking about those critical errors that could find a whole website or app crashing down.
Yeah, no one wants that.
And remember that Spotify bug LlamaRestX found.
Yeah.
That's a perfect example of how this technology can make those apps we use every day
Right.
more reliable and bug-free.
So this isn't just about helping developers.
Yeah.
It's about a better experience for all of us who use software.
Exactly. That's what makes this research so important. It has the potential to impact all of us
Okay.
in a good way and to really get how all the pieces fit together. The researchers did what's called an ablation study.
Okay, what is that?
It's like taking LlamaRestTest apart,
Okay.
piece by piece, to see which parts were the most important.
So it's like taking apart a cake
Yeah, kind
to figure out which ingredient gives it that amazing taste.
Exactly.
Okay, I like that. What did they learn?
Well, they found that all the parts of LlamaRestTest mattered,
Okay.
but two really stood out.
Okay.
The server response analysis
Okay.
and the dependency modeling.
So like when we talked about LlamaRestTest being like a detective,
Right.
this is where those detective skills are really important.
Yeah, it's about more than just knowing how the API is built.
Right.
It's about watching how it actually works in the real world and changing the approach as needed.
This makes me think about self-driving cars.
Okay.
They're always learning and adjusting to what's happening on the road.
Right.
They're not just following a bunch of pre-programmed rules.
Right, they're learning as they go.
Exactly.
That's a good comparison.
So they're learning from experience and getting better over time.
That's right.
Is that a fair way to put it?
I think so. It's all about building systems that learn and change on their own, instead of just using a fixed set of instructions.
And that brings us to the really interesting part of this research, the idea of self-learning testing systems.
Now that's cool stuff.
Self-learning software sounds like something from a sci-fi movie.
It might sound futuristic, but it's closer than you think.
Really?
Imagine software that's testing itself all the time, finding its own problems,
Okay.
and even fixing them automatically.
Wow.
And all without any help from humans.
That's amazing. It's like having a built-in immune system for our digital world.
Exactly.
Always on the lookout for threats and getting rid of them before
Right.
they can cause any real harm.
That's a great way to think about it.
This brings up a pretty thought-provoking question.
What's that?
If these smaller LLMs are already so good at handling something as complex as REST APIs, what else could they do in the future?
Right.
What other parts of our digital lives could they totally change?
Lots of possibilities there.
There are, but before we get too lost in the future, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, that these smaller LLMs might be more useful for regular developers out there.
Right.
Would they still need a ton of computing power to run?
That's a great question. And it's actually one of the most exciting things about this research.
Okay.
Because these LLMs are smaller and more focused on a specific task.
Right.
They don't need those huge supercomputers like the giant general-purpose models do.
So you're saying that even small teams, or even just one developer working alone, could use this technology without spending a fortune on expensive hardware?
That's the idea. It could really make these powerful AI tools available to everyone.
Wow.
So anyone with a good idea could build amazing software.
That's really inspiring. It sounds like this research is opening up a whole new world of possibilities for software.
Absolutely.
But what does it all mean for the average person who might not be a tech expert?
Well, LLMs aren't stuck in research labs or science fiction movies anymore.
Yeah.
They're becoming essential tools for building and maintaining the digital world that we all use every day.
So it's not just about fancy chatbots or AI-generated art.
Yeah.
It's about making sure that the websites we use to shop,
Exactly.
the apps we use for banking, and all the other online services we depend on are actually working the way they should.
It's about making sure our digital lives actually work.
That's a good way to put it. So this research shows that smaller, more specialized LLMs can actually be better than those massive resource-hungry models.
Right, especially for certain jobs.
At doing specific tasks like testing REST APIs.
Exactly.
And they can do it using less power, which is super important if you actually want to use them in the real world.
Absolutely. And the exciting thing is that we're just getting started.
Really?
As researchers learn more about what LLMs can do, who knows what incredible discoveries are coming next.
And speaking of discoveries, I think it's time we shift gears and look at some specific examples from this research that really show how powerful this approach is.
Sounds good.
Are you ready to dive into the data?
Absolutely. Let's go.
All right, let's dive in. I love getting into the nitty-gritty. What were some of the specifics that really stood out to you?
Well, remember how we were talking about LlamaRestTest being so much better at code coverage? Well, the research actually gets into the numbers. And that's really something. LlamaRestTest just blew the other tools out of the water.
Okay.
Sometimes it was testing twice as much code, or even more.
That's a huge difference, but it's not all about the numbers, right?
Right.
How does that actually translate into finding and fixing bugs in the real world?
Well, it means LlamaRestTest is able to get way deeper into the code, test more of it.
Okay.
It's like if you were exploring a giant uncharted territory. LlamaRestTest is that fearless explorer, checking out every corner, making sure they don't miss anything.
Right.
And because it's so thorough, it's finding those hidden bugs that the other tools just don't see.
You mentioned before that LlamaRestTest found a bunch of errors in, like, the Awesome API and Spotify that the other tools completely missed. Can you tell us more about what they found?
Those were really interesting cases because they show how LlamaRestTest can handle really complicated stuff.
Okay.
In a way that other tools just can't. It wasn't finding simple bugs, the kind you see right away.
Right.
It was finding bugs that were buried deep in the code, hidden behind all these complicated dependencies.
So it's like LlamaRestTest has X-ray vision, seeing right through all that complexity to find the problem.
Exactly.
So it's not just finding any bug, it's finding the really nasty ones that could cause big problems later on.
Exactly. And that's what makes this so important for making software more reliable and secure.
Right, because no one wants their apps crashing all the time. This sounds like it could make a big difference for everyone.
Absolutely. I mean, think about all the times you've been frustrated with a buggy app or a website that keeps crashing.
Oh, yeah, way too often.
LlamaRestTest and these kinds of AI tools could help prevent all that frustration.
That would be amazing.
And make our digital lives run a lot smoother.
It really seems like this research isn't just some theoretical thing.
Yeah.
It has real-world implications that could make things better for all of us.
I agree.
That's what I love about this kind of deep dive.
Yeah.
We start with something like REST APIs, which most people have probably never even heard of.
Right.
And then we end up talking about AI that can test software and make it better for everyone.
It is pretty cool how it all connects.
It really shows how this technology has the potential to totally change the way we build and use software.
For sure.
And it's amazing to think it all started with a single research paper.
It really is. It just shows you the power of curiosity.
Yeah.
And the human drive to explore and discover new things.
Absolutely. Well, as we wrap things up here, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about.
Okay.
We've talked about how these smaller, more focused LLMs can be even better than the really huge ones. We've seen how they can learn and adapt, get better over time, and how they have the potential to make our digital world safer, more reliable, and just better overall.
Absolutely.
So the big question is, what's next?
What is next? That's a great question.
What other incredible breakthroughs are out there just waiting for researchers to discover them?
Right, as they keep pushing the boundaries of what these LLMs can do.
Yeah, that's what makes it all so exciting. The future is wide open, full of possibilities.
That's right. And like we talked about today, sometimes the biggest discoveries come from the most unexpected places.
Right.
From those who are brave enough to think differently and challenge the way things have always been done.
That's a great point. So to everyone listening out there, stay curious, keep exploring, and never be afraid to ask questions. Who knows, maybe you'll be the one to make the next big AI breakthrough.
That would be amazing.
That's it for this deep dive into the world of LLMs and REST API testing. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
See you then.